Oi, oi, it's your boy, Jack Slack, Fights Gone By podcast, sweating my balls off because I've had to turn off the fan for this and close the windows, and it is absolutely baking in England at the moment because the world's on fire. UFC 240 coming this weekend. Wanted to get a quick preview in before we get there. Won't do any news today. We'll just plow right in with this card. And the more I look at this card, the more I'm actually sort of okay with it. I will say this for it. No heavyweights on the card, which I always appreciate. Just looking at the Tapology page, Brian Ortega versus Zabit Magomedsharipov. Do you remember that was promised for this card? And then it just sort of was never mentioned again. So what we got going on? It's happening in Edmonton, which is Alberta in Canada. And naturally there's a few... Well, what was it they said last time they were in Canada? There's 20-something Canadians on the roster. It was quite a low amount, I thought. But, there's a couple here that are in sort of questionable, well, not questionable, but obvious sort of setup to win matches. Gavin Tucker versus Sung Woo Choi. I mean, Woo Choi's all right, but he did lose his UFC debut. And Yoshinori Hori, what a great name, is fighting Hakeem Dawodu, who's obviously Canadian, coming into debut in the UFC after a run in Pancrase. Actually, recently lost to my boy Issei Tamura and got knocked out by him. Bloody hell. Your striking's not good if you're getting knocked out by Issei Tamura, because that guy is a lay and prayer through and through. But he's fighting Gavin Tucker. Gavin Tucker really hasn't done anything in ages, actually. Came into the UFC with that win over Sam Cecilia. We were all convinced he was the future, because that was a fight where Sam Cecilia, I think, threw something like 5 punches and landed 1. Did nothing. And then Cecilia went to Bellator and immediately co-headlined for them. But yeah, it looked really good in that one, then lost a decision to Rick Glenn about 5-6 months later. That was in September 2017. Was scheduled to fight Andrei Sukmatov in 2018, having been off with injuries, and then was injured again. So he hasn't actually fought since September 2017, which is crazy. But he's got an interesting style. He does a lot of moving, does a lot of stuff on the outside. And looked very, very smooth against Cecilia. And, Cecilia didn't really do enough to merit anything. I think he was angry about the decision, and I was like, what? That sort of Roy Nelson indignance at the decision. But quite good at, making it hard for other people to swing back at him, which we like. Oh, no, he's fighting Sung Woo Choi, who's actually I say a bit more legit. He's been in the UFC for one fight, lost it, whereas Yoshinori Hori is fighting Hakeem Dawodu, and he's not been in the UFC at all. But, he could surprise us. I was watching Pancrase just the other day. There's some good lads over there. Alexis Davis, coming off the 2-year anniversary of that barn burner with Cindy Dandois, is fighting Viviane Araujo. We're not here to talk about me. Does she arouse you? Araujo made a debut, a UFC debut, at the Namajunas Andrade event. Scored a knockout in round 3. Looked alright up to that point, I thought. From what I recall, Alexis Davis coming off 2 losses, Katlyn Chookagian and Jennifer Maia. Legit black belt, but just, it's one thing to pull up all the clips of Cindy Dandois striking like shit against Alexis Davis, but Alexis Davis still struggled with her on the feet and went to the decision with her. Krzysztof Jutko, who I cannot believe is still fighting, he's got to be 45 now, against Marc-Andre Barriolte, who has again fought in the UFC once, fought Andrew Sanchez back in May, lost the decision. Krzysztof Jutko just snapped his 3-fight losing streak when he got lost to David Branch in a split decision, but Uriah Hall knocked him out, and Brad Tavares also knocked him out, so that he had a couple of cancelled fights, came back, Alan Amadovsky, who was undefeated at the time, so fair play, and he won the decision over him. Can't tell you much about Marc-Andre, but, you might get a decent scrap out of that. I think that's as heavy as they're getting on this card. I don't think we've even got any 205ers. And then we're into the main card proper, which is begins with Olivier Aubin-Mercier versus Arman Tsarukyan. Now, Tsarukyan! You'll remember me just splooging all over him, because he came in as a guy being set up to lose to Islam Makhachev in the UFC's first Russian event, and he put on a barn burner. He lost, as he was supposed to, but he put on a barn burner and had a lot of good moments during it. Makhachev's whole thing is just mauling people on the ground, and Tsarukyan did a very good job of making a very entertaining fight out of it and scrambling lots. Aubin-Mercier likes his jab, but mainly is sort of a clinchy, grindy sort of guy. That fight against Alexander Hernandez was just two grinding people meeting together and grinding each other down. So, I mean, that could be good. Are they giving it's not like a gifted win for Olivier Aubin-Mercier because Tsarukyan is legit. So you could get some fun out of that. Then you got Jeff Neal versus Niko Price. Niko Price back in the win column, beat Tim Means. If you remember that fight, that was Tim Means coming out, throwing long, I think he was the southpaw, so long left straights, and then Niko Price would fire the right back over the top afterwards. Means kept overextending, and Price would just crack him with the right hand every time. Back and forth, I mean, Means was landing tasty elbows, he was controlling the lead hand, turning over the elbow, even grabbing the wrist at several points, like Izzy versus Tavares. But Price eventually got the knockout in the, I think that was the dying seconds of round 1, wasn't it? But Price is kind of herky-jerky. Like, I know we're not allowed to say herky-jerky anymore, but he's really weirdly built dude, like massive wide shoulders, and boxes kind of like when they put those muscle men into tough men competitions. You know, when you put like a dude with muscles that are too big to swing gloves, and he just looks bizarre. Price looks a little bit like that a lot of the time when he's striking. That was especially noticeable in that fight against Abdul Al Hassan, when he got starched in the first round. Just Al Hassan got in his face, and he started trying to swing back off the fence. Ducked in on a takedown, failed to get it off the fence, and then decided to just like cover up and swing back. And Al Hassan just poured it on and knocked him out. But Niko Price, I mean, if you need a reason to watch this card, or tune into this card before the main event, which we're going to wax lyrical about for quite a while. He's got, I think, he's one decision on his record. I'm just scanning through it here. Yeah, he's got one decision on his record. That was back in 2016, and he's fought like 8 times since then. Dude is active and either finishes or gets finished. And as much as I've pinned him as like a middle-of-the-pack guy, he's only got the 2 losses. I mean, Al Hassan shocked him very quickly, and Vicente Luque darce choked him back in 2017. I can barely remember that one. He's fighting Jeff Neal, who's on a great little streak at the moment, going back to a fight with Kevin Holland in 2017 that he lost. Stopped by Kevin Holland. Kevin Holland is normally quite a slow, boring guy. Yeah, Neal's legit. I mean, he just beat Bilal Muhammad, who we were all very hot on. He'd beaten both my Means, Jordan Mean and Tim Means. Both dudes who love their elbows, actually. That's a weird connection. He'd beaten Randy Brown, lost. All these dudes have fought each other. This division is crazy. Like, you think of the top end of the division, and you think of them separate from these guys, but there are just a load of guys who fought each other a dozen times in the middle of this division. Chance Raconteur, isn't he down at lightweight now? He was looking absolutely fucking enormous in his last fight. But the streak that Neal's on at the moment is awesome. Couple of guys you don't really know, but then Brian Camozzi, decent. Frank Camacho, very decent. And then Bilal Muhammad, very decent. So, really good streak. Beats Niko Price. You know, you're talking about, like, whoever is in the top 15 that's not really doing anything, you're going to throw him in with Jeff Neal, probably. But let's talk about the actual main and co-main matchups that I really want to get into in more detail. I know I also saved that flyweight fight from the undercard that I want to talk about in more detail, too. The Alejandro Pantoja versus Davison Figueiredo. Let's do Cyborg versus Spencer first. I just wrote something on this at Unibet. The more I watch of Felicia Spencer, the more I like her, to be honest. She has a very peculiar style. They keep saying she's got a black belt in Taekwondo, and when you hear that, you go, okay, so did everyone as a child. It's one of the most popular martial arts on earth. If your parents put you into it in childhood, you could have been a wunderkind and practicing really hard, and you could have kept that throughout your adult life. But most people, it's like, got a black belt in Taekwondo, started training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, stopped doing Taekwondo, and then just trained, I want to say actual martial arts, but, practical martial arts, and they lost all the kicking ability. But she's well up for kicking. It's fantastic. She threw out a load of... I was watching her Invicta fights, and a lot of Invicta fights just piss me off, because firstly, the standard of women's MMA, even at the highest levels, is still considerably lower than men's standard. But in Invicta, these people are often coming off like an amateur career, doing their first fight there. Felicia Spencer is one. Her first fight in Invicta was her first professional fight against someone else debuting from their amateur career. But from the start, you could see she knows what she's doing. And I was reading up on her. I mean, she's a maths teacher in Florida, I think. So an heir to the title of Rich Franklin, because people used to take the piss out of him for being a maths teacher and also UFC middleweight champion, which is nuts. But she has been training BJJ since she was like 12, which, as she's now 28, she's a black belt, so pretty legit on the ground. Because if you watch any women's fight, they don't generally, there's not a lot of hitters in the women's divisions, and that's why when you have people like Cyborg and Nunes, it is such a shock for the people they fight. But they all end up going to the ground eventually, and Felicia Spencer looks really shit hot on the ground. Even in her first fight and all through her Invicta career, she was just constantly moving towards the mounted crucifix, taking the back beautifully. Interesting sort of takedown style, doesn't really go for takedowns out in the open, pushes to the fence first, uses the fence, hits a lot. Well, she does, she looks for the body lock, but guys are getting good at trying to deny the body lock now. So she does a lot of that Randy Couture / Khabib Nurmagomedov favorite, where if you've got one underhook and you're leaning into them and you're trying to get your other hand around them and they're fighting you on that hand. So instead, you just drop that hand between their legs, lock your hands under their taint, basically. Well, I was about to say, what do you call a lady taint? But you put your hands, you lock your hands under their crotch and you can just lift them. And, obviously once you've lifted someone off the ground, it's a lot easier to kick their legs out or just tilt them over. It's quite hard to defend a takedown when you're up in the air. And the one that, she does it the way that Randy Couture did it, where you just tilt them, and Randy Couture would deliberately fall with his head on their nose, like Gonzaga. But Khabib, if you watch him against Conor McGregor did a very good job of fighting off the hands in that fight. That fight really is one of the most misrepresented fights in MMA, to be honest, because everyone remembers it as this one-sided ass-kicking, but most of it, until like round 3, oh no, maybe round 2, but a lot of it was just Khabib trying to get his grips and Conor not letting him get his grips. The other bit that really hacks me off is when people take that "it's only business" bit, because he was getting beat up at the end of round 2, and then in round 3, not a lot happens because they're along the fence and McGregor grabs inside of his glove. And that's what Khabib's losing his shit at Herb Dean about at the end of the round. And that's when McGregor says it's only business. It's not like he was taking the beating, stood up and went, it's only business. He was holding his glove, cheating. And then he was like, it's only business. I mean, he did get his ass kicked, but like the need to misrepresent things is just hilarious. Anyway, when Khabib did it to McGregor, he was locking his hands under his butt, picking him up, and then kicking out his other leg from behind. Very cool. Did it like 3 or 4 times because he wasn't able to get the body lock for most of the fight. And then when he does get the back in the 4th, that's because he's got his hands locked around McGregor, and he just pulls him straight into back control. It's what Luke Rockhold did to David Branch, and then, as in lock the hands around the body, and then he was trying to do it against Jan Blachowicz, and he couldn't do it. And you're like, bloody hell, if you can't do that up at light heavyweight, I am rethinking my decision to bet the house on you being light heavyweight champion, or at least getting a title shot. So anyway, she does a lot of that, taking people down along the fence. The thing that really bothers me about her is that, firstly, she doesn't give a fuck. Like, she gets blasted in the face by people. And she doesn't even seem phased. Like Megan Anderson did not a lot in that fight, but she did pop her immediately with a long left straight that snapped her head back. Spencer didn't seem bothered at all. She's still like throwing up high kicks and wheel kicks that have like no speed on them, but she's just doing it anyway. Her second fight, she throws a wheel kick. She threw the wheel kick like 8 times in that fight, but she throws a wheel kick, steps in with the left hand once the foot lands on the floor, and then ducks into the clinch. That's what she does. She just does weird shit and then falls into clinches. Problem is that it's not like... It's a complete contrast to Frankie Edgar, who's in the main event. She does not hide her attempts to take people down well, and that's going to be really, a lot of trouble, because what she's going to do is she's going to either get hammered with punches on the way in, but even then she's going to fall chest to chest with Cyborg and going to try and lean on her along the fence, and Cyborg's going to, probably going to be like, nah, not happening, mate. And, the Cyborg thing is... The reason that Felicia Spencer is being treated as such an underdog in this fight, even though Cyborg just got starched in 50 seconds or whatever it was, is because we all recognize that Cyborg and Amanda Nunes have knockout power, and that is incredibly rare in the women's divisions, to have one puff stuff, in your hands, and legs, if you're Amanda Nunes. I mean, that's why I quite like women focusing on kicking and elbows and knees, which actually Spencer does a great deal of elbowing and knee in the clinch. It's like she realizes, my hands aren't good, I'm not going to hurt him with my hands, I'll just go nuts trying to elbow and knee him. But, I'd love to see more women focusing on that, because it's hard to knock people out with your hands, even if you're like a middleweight. And you notice this whenever Cyborg fights anyone, and whenever Nunes fights anyone, basically. There is this just, whether or not you're scared of it, you will adapt because of it. You'll have to do, Valentina Shevchenko used to, been punched hundreds and hundreds of times, I'm sure, throughout her career. But being against Amanda Nunes, she really just takes an already relatively conservative game back a notch, even more conservative. At the moment, there just seems to be no... It's very shocking for women to have to deal with that power. And, Ronda and Gina Carano also had it in their right hand. They were pretty good at hitting people. If you can hit hard in those divisions, it's a massive leg up on the competition. Think of Hisei Watanabe. Fucking awesome hitter. And she was, strawweight, wasn't she? So that's the thing. Spencer is going to have to probably eat some punches to get to clinches because she's not very good at hiding her ducks into clinches. She just does it off, spastic flurries. And I also think, there's a good chance that she gets in there and the weird shit she was doing against all these women she wasn't at all scared of, she can't do that as freely against Cyborg. Maybe she doesn't come out kicking. Maybe she comes out, awkwardly jabbing and shooting. And then you're just doing stuff that you've never done in another professional fight at any level. And you're trying to do it against the best women's featherweight in the world who's not Amanda Nunes, but then Amanda Nunes is also not a women's featherweight. So, there's a lot being asked of Felicia Spencer here. Actually, I forgot to mention it, but there's a fucking great GIF I put up from one of her fights. It was probably her trickiest fight. I can't remember the lass's name, but she was a big hitter, and she really did well stopping the takedowns. And she snaps Felicia Spencer's head down and goes for a guillotine. And Felicia Spencer stands on one leg, brings her other knee up, and starts kneeing the girl in the side of the head while in a standing guillotine. It was a proper Anthony Pettis style move, and she did it 4 times before this girl let go. And as people pointed out on Facebook on my feed, that was baller. That was baller as shit. So even though she's the biggest underdog on the card, probably well worth a watch because she's pretty awesome on the ground and she's fucking weird on the feet. Plus, actual 145er. I'm sure she could cut down to 135. Looking at her, she's not like Megan Anderson where you're 6 foot tall and they're get down to bantamweight. But equally, she's not one of these lasses that the majority of Cyborg's career has been against, which is bantamweights and even flyweights that they asked to chub up just to fight Cyborg. And the UFC were doing it. They're chub up and fight Cyborg, and then you can go back to your normal division in the UFC. You get a nice payday, and we won't count it as a loss on your, and cut you. So that's that fight significantly overanalyzed, but I would love it if Felicia Spencer wins that one. I think all of our expectations are sort of off in the featherweight division because we were all working under the false assumption that Megan Anderson was pretty good, and it turned out she absolutely can't grapple at all. It does still look like just the Cyborg show and then Amanda Nunes if she ever wants to go up again. And Holly Holm did decently at featherweight against Cyborg, to be fair, but, I think she's probably on the verge of retirement, being 40 years old and having just got brutally knocked out. So before we talk main event, let's talk about Pantoja versus Figueiredo. Really like this fight. This is the one that's sort of people who, when you go, what a shit card, people in the know will go, well, about that flyweight fight, but also shit card. So you got Figueiredo and Pantoja. Pantoja is riding a bit of a hide. Figueiredo was the guy to save the flyweight division because he knocked out a few guys, and obviously that is gold dust at 125 pounds. Bit weird because there's loads of big hitters up at bantamweight right now. I don't know why the extra 10 pounds makes such a huge difference, but it does seem to. But he's had up until the Formiga fight, he had about 4 fights in the UFC. And I think he stopped 3 of them. Knocked out John Moraga with a body punch, and that's how most of us awakened to his presence. And he was actually going to fight Joseph Benavidez at one point, which would have been a cool fight. But then he fought Jussier Formiga, and Jussier Formiga just awkwarded all over him because Jussier Formiga is shoot to your back man, and Figueiredo really didn't seem to get in rhythm or on his game at all in that fight. He just sort of walked forward, and you were going, well, where are the massive counters that you normally try and throw? Because a lot of what Figueiredo does, and I think I've said this before and likened him to Gomi a little bit, it's walking forward, wide stance, low hips, and when you come in, he bangs your body or throws big uppercuts at your head. And he couldn't get any of that working against Formiga for the most part. Meanwhile, Pantoja, a little bit more of an all-rounder from what I've seen of him. He's been fighting forever. This division, pretty young, but he's been with the UFC since 2016. But even before that, he was fighting Shuto, Shooter Brazil, RFA, all over the world, really. And he racked up this enormous list of wins, firstly, but also he fought Formiga back in 2010. He's only 29 now, so he fought Formiga when he was 20. Came into the UFC via The Ultimate Fighter and lost to Ogi Kubo on the show, but again, Ogi Kubo didn't end up in the UFC, ended up over in Rising, and he's doing good stuff over there, and providing cannon fodder for Kyoji. But then he beat, Eric Shelton and Neil Seery, pretty low-ranking guys in the division, lost to Dustin Ortiz. However, recently he's beaten Brandon Moreno, who they've just re-signed for that Mexico event, and presumably to rebuild the smouldering remains of the flyweight division. But then most recently he stopped Ulka Sasaki and Wilson Hayes, and Wilson Hayes, just a punch bag. It was almost identical to the Henry Cejudo stoppage in terms of the punch that put him down. He just can't deal with straight punches. Because everyone's, even these other flyweights have an inch of height and several inches of reach on him. And Pantoja just shot was it a right straight or a left straight? I presume, I can't remember if Wilson Hayes is the southpaw or not, but they shot a rear-handed straight down the centre, just knocked him flat on his back and jumped in and finished him off. The Ulka Sasaki one was a bit weirder because Sasaki's a decent wrestler, and he came out and shot on him and ended up in guard. It wasn't like a cool guard pull. It wasn't Antonio Ruggiero Nogueira shooting and then pulling half guard, or these guys like Maya and Lovato and even Michele Nicolini the other day, pulling half guard with the underhook and actually just getting up on the single again. He just shot in and then fell to his back, and Ulka Sasaki almost passed his guard. Then he scrambled back, attempted some nice stuff off his back. I think he tried to armbar him, and then ended up on his back, which was very cool, and then finished him with a choke. So good scrambly guy, good on the ground, surprisingly decent on the feet, but again, everyone looks awesome on the feet when they fight Wilson Hayes. Presumably, you're going to have to be a little bit more careful with Davison Figueiredo. And the other thing is that from what I've seen of Pantoja, I don't think he's as slick trying to take people down as Jussier Formiga often is. And Jussier Formiga also quite good at hiding his shots, not against the very best guys, but generally a little bit better. And Davison Figueiredo couldn't really open up against him because he was worried about the shots all the time and the takedowns and stuff. Whereas I think Figueiredo will probably feel a little bit more comfortable opening up against Pantoja this time. But anyway, main event time. Let's talk about the thing you actually care about, because it's basically the only thing asking people who aren't super interested in flyweight fights to buy this card. Well, before we even start, I did a brand new Filthy Casuals guide to Frankie Edgar, which you can see on the YouTube channel. And also, I re-released the Filthy Casuals guide to Max Holloway, a little bit out of date in terms of it not having any of the loss to Dustin Poirier in there. But, he does all the same shit. It's he's just lost a fight since then, that's all. Again, these are bringing me into contact with the stupidest people on the internet. I said, Frankie Edgar, though not the biggest hitter, and then people in the comments going oh, I think you'll find Chad Mendes. And you're like, okay, so he knocked out Chad Mendes and Gray Maynard in the space of a decade. That's not a big hitter. And they're like, you know nothing about fights. Wah! You're going, why are you here? You're clearly a moron. Leave me be. And the Mousasi fans, I deliberately went out of my way to upset them in this one. I can't help it if there is a clip of Mousasi losing to every strategy or tactic that I want to talk about. But anyway, yeah, it's well worth a look. And I also wrote an article on Unibet about the specifics of the matchup. And, this is one we've been interested in quite a while, because it was supposed to happen back in 2017. I think someone said I was talking about this in episode 61 or something like that. The interest is that Frankie Edgar, as old as he is, he's been doing this 12 years in the UFC, I think it is, and he's almost 40 years old. But as old as he is, he still has a very interesting game, which a lot of guys still haven't got. Every good wrestler that Max Holloway has fought, none of them have set up their takedown attempts as well as Frankie Edgar has. Frankie Edgar is very, very good at hiding his takedown attempts, and he does it by being the little engine that could. He gets in there and he trades punches with big, scary hitters like Jeremy Stevens. Jeremy Stevens, he was catching Jeremy Stevens' fucking clotheslines, the wide swings with his right hand on his forearm, coming back with a 3-punch combination and then moving off to get Jeremy Stevens convinced that they were going to have a slugfest. These guys come in knowing that Frankie Edgar wants to take them down, and then by the time he's hit them a few times, they're swinging back at him and forgetting about their hips. He chinned Stevens with a 3-piece combination and then moved offline. Stevens comes in, swinging at him, And he immediately takes him down effortlessly. That's Frankie Edgar at his best. He has beautiful anticipation of exactly when you're in boxing mode and when you're in wrestling mode. And he does very well at getting you into boxing mode, specifically with these counter combinations. If you just throw 1 or 2 punches at a time, dudes are not going to forget that you're trying to take him down. He does very well putting in 3-punch combinations, 4-punch combinations, going head, body, head. Even if his body shots are not anything special. He's not hurting anyone with them. But if you watch him go for a body shot, he throws a right straight at Gray Maynard's body. I think in their second fight, he goes to throw the right straight. Gray Maynard almost falls over because he thinks that Frankie Edgar's going to take him down, and then he gets hit in the body instead. Next time Edgar goes to hit the body, he doesn't react. And then the next time, Edgar just ducks in on his hips and takes him down. Those body shots numb people to the up, down, up movement and the level change. Very, very clever. Very, very clever style. And I think that's what's so interesting about this fight. He has better setups for his takedowns than anyone that Holloway's fought. And Holloway was taken down twice by Brian Ortega, and Brian Ortega had 1 takedown in the UFC prior to that, successful, and 10 attempted. He is not a good takedown artist. He did immediately hop back up from under Ortega, but, it's very interesting because Edgar will pick better spots to do that. He will make sure you're in the right place in the cage. The moment that he hits the mat, if he thinks the guy's going to wall walk up, he turns them off the cage. If he thinks they're just going to lay on their back throwing up submission attempts like Yair Rodriguez, he pushes them into the cage. Now, that's not saying that Frankie Edgar's perfect. He does a lot of sort of charging in on straight lines, especially if you don't go to him. If you make him come to you, he will charge in on straight lines. And especially if you don't stand still, if you move around. One of the things about that, circling off to each side footwork, is that it works best on a slow-moving or stationary target. If you're having to follow them, you really can't do that. And if you watch the second Jones-Gustafsson fight, the angles are taken away because Gustafsson has to keep following Jones. But Ortega caught him with a nice intercepting elbow, and then that uppercut, the bus driver uppercut, that perfect Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, the uppercut. But Ortega was getting boxed up in that fight. He was losing by a margin of 3 punches to 1 or something like that. But he was doing all right with his jab, because if I said to you, this guy really wants to hit your hips, he wants to hit your hips by getting you to swing your power punches at him, and he's also a foot shorter than you, and he's also got half a foot less reach than you. What strike would you use? The correct answer would be the jab. I would throw the fucking jab, and I would barely even throw the jab. I would tail whip the jab out and immediately be ready to clamp it back down to my hip again. And that's what BJ Penn did in their first fight. It's what Jose Aldo did through their fights. That is a fantastic strike because it doesn't give Edgar anything to grab onto. He throws combinations at you and counters in combination to get you throwing in combination. He wants rock'em sock'em robots so that he can hit your hips. Just whipping out the jab like that really stifles him quite a bit. But of course, the majority of Aldo's success was in making Edgar chase him and then pivoting offline, because Edgar would just keep running in a straight line. It was hilarious. And Aldo kept pivoting around that lead leg, and it was there to be kicked, and Edgar did it twice in each fight. But if he'd done that every time Aldo pivoted, Aldo pivoted off 20 times in that second fight, he would have hammered that lead leg. There's nothing magic about Aldo's legs. Being a great low kicker doesn't make your legs invulnerable to being kicked, especially if you're pivoting around them and putting them in a weak position to take kicks. That's something I harp on about every time we talk about those fights, but it's crazy that Edgar saw that in the first fight and his team didn't adapt to it in the second fight. The other great thing about being elusive against Edgar is that it meant when Aldo stood still, Edgar was taking that second step. He'd been dropping away and putting the right hand and then gliding offline. So Edgar was in the habit of running 2 steps every time he thought that Aldo would take a step back. So that's how you saw him end up running past so many times when Aldo pivoted, because he thought Aldo was going to retreat. But also it meant that Aldo could stop and knee him in the gut and then punch an underhook through or just throw him off with the whizzer. Kneeing guys in the gut, especially if they're looking for a takedown. And Edgar's thing is picking up a single leg from long distance. Setting that up well is a good way to do that, rather than just looking for knees desperately and then getting taken down anyway. I do love that Edgar pickup though, that if he gets the jab and the body jab going, the dipping jab and the body jab, it looks exactly the same. He goes jab, body jab, jab, and then he pushes his hand out as if to jab, but his right hand goes too as well towards their knee, and he jabs them with a palm in the shoulder, and that takes their weight off their lead leg, and he pushes forward and picks up the lead leg and has the single leg. It's beautiful. And if he hits it well, he can even run through it, like against Uriah Faber. He just ran straight through into a leg drag position on the ground. Against Cub Swanson and Penn in their second fight, he picked up the lead leg, dropped it and slid down the opponent's back and just took a body lock on their back. But he'll also just pick it up and then drop it and try and hit him with the right hand or a body kick or something like that. He does lots of cool little stuff. And I think that'll all be very interesting against Max. I think Max, the question in this one is like, Max's thing is volume for the most part. He does other things, but a lot of what he does is volume. How are you going to do volume against a guy who just wants you to throw combinations? I think we could see Max take more of the first Aldo fight approach, where the first and most of the second round, in fact, most of the fight was just feinting and jabs. And then, the second fight was a lot more aggressive, and it was a bit like Penn Edgar 2. Once you know you've got the measure of this man and you don't have to be terrified. I think there was a lot of that in the first Edgar Penn fight, and I think there was a lot of that in the first Holloway Aldo fight, where you know this guy for all the things he's done, and you're like, fucking hell, I really better watch my P's and Q's. And then the second time you go, well, I won that last one. Let's just go for it. Edgar took Penn down within a minute of the second fight starting. Basically didn't commit to much until like round 2-3 of the first fight. So lots of feinting and jabbing from Holloway. I would like to see him fight on the back foot. He does do it. He did it at, he did it against Jeremy Stephens, but he did it against Anthony Pettis. He'd take a step back and Pettis would step in and then he'd hit him with a body kick. That's the thing that I like about Max a lot, is that he's a very adaptive striker. He didn't adapt too well to even in that fight against Dustin Poirier that he just lost. He was coming back in the fourth and fifth that he was doing very well compared to he got properly rattled and knocked about in the first and second. But he changes and grows, and that's what we like about him. So presumably he will have something prepared that's a little bit different for a guy like Frankie Edgar. This isn't Ricardo Lamas just going, okay, well, now I'm going to shoot on your hips. This is a guy whose whole game is going between the combinations and the shots to try and get you firing back. And if you don't fire back, he'll just keep landing combinations on you. I think it would be very interesting to see how Holloway can get off the body shots, because the thing I love about body punches against wrestlers is that if they drop on your hips as if they would, you could try and drop under a head punch. You can't drop under a punch to the chest. It's just going to hit you in the top of the chest. And especially with like uppercuts and things, the underhook is already in there. If you throw an uppercut to the body, we're talking about Gomi again now, and Davison Figueiredo does the same thing. Throw a nice right uppercut to the body when the opponent steps in. If they drop on it, you've got that underhook there. Same with the left hook to the body, left uppercut to the body, shovel hook, whatever you want to do. Straight punches to the body are a little bit better because they work like stiff arms. I was saying this a lot in my Killing the Queen, Ronda Rousey. I was like, I like the straight to the body. I think that would work really well for Holly Holm against her or someone like that. Body jab is another one. You aren't stepping through that or around it. It's just there to check distance while scoring points and possibly winding you. But the big body shots that Max does so well with, where he sets them up with tap, 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 boom, those work really well to turn them into an underhook when the opponent steps in. So it'll be interesting to see if he can get off the body shots. I think, compare him to someone like Jeremy Stephens. Jeremy Stephens is as well as he did stopping, Edgar shot like 20 takedowns and succeeded on about 5. But Jeremy Stephens is exactly the kind of fighter that the standard Frankie Edgar plan will work on, because Jeremy Stephens is really hard to take down generally, but the moment he starts swinging and getting ahead of himself, his hips are wide open. Whereas I feel like Holloway might not have the best pure sprawl, dig underhooks sort of style of takedown defense. Jeremy Stephens can come forward and still sprawl on people quite well. I think Holloway is more capable of putting together a plan that makes his striking very difficult to shoot under or to time. Build off the jab, use lots of feints, hit body shots, draw Edgar more towards you than you go towards him. If you're going to kick low kicks on the shin/calf. Against Pettis, he was throwing front snap kicks into the front of the shin, which is brutal. That's like women's self-defense, they say. If you're wearing your boots or whatever, just kick them in the front of the shin. I think I'd like to see Edgar kick lots, because, if you kick more at people, you can get them to kick more back at you, and if you get them into a kick, he might be not dumb enough to fall for, I'm going to throw punches at you, so you throw him back, but he might be dumb enough to fall for, I'm going to throw kicks at you, so you throw kicks back, and then I catch and move in. Edgar caught a lot of kicks against Benson Henderson back in the day. Didn't really capitalize on them all that well, but I think it's a really interesting match, more specifically for the style matchup. There's a lot of people complaining about Edgar getting the shot in the first place, because really, even as an Edgar fan, I'm looking at what he's done in the last few years, and it's not a lot. It's been a lot of faded names and losing to Ortega. And really, the only guy who wasn't a fading old-timer or that lost to Ortega is Yair Rodriguez. And he battered Yair Rodriguez, but Yair Rodriguez is a guy with some very glaring weaknesses that we pointed out before that fight. We never seen him wall walk, never seen him worry about his position in the cage. All I've seen him do is throw spazzy kicks, and then when he gets taken down, he's like, I'm going to throw as many guard attacks as possible. So yeah, I mean, he's got a lot to do here, Edgar, because he fought Cub Swanson, who was very much fading in his most recent fight, and he fought and that one, if you remember that was, he got knocked out by Ortega, and then he took that fight within 2 months, and you were going, well, surely there's a period of no contact time that he's obviously not adhering to. He's clearly there sparring days after getting brutally starched. That's the stuff that really works. There is no magic number for time after a knockout that you shouldn't do anything. But famously, Freddie Roach made Pacquiao take a year off after the Marquez knockout. I can imagine that would do a lot more good for you than, say, taking a week off or going straight back into sparring right away. But my policy has always been at least do the minimum that they ask you to, so that you're not at fault if you die. We can go we did the stuff that the Athletic Commission / the doctor said we should do. I mean, if we don't even adhere to that, we're no better than Bellator, and that's not what you want to be. Anyway, I've rambled on for 40 minutes about a card that we all thought was rubbish, but I'm actually quite excited for it. I like Felicia Spencer. I think there's the possibility she pulls the upset just by scrappiness and staying on Cyborg. Cyborg, particularly against Holly Holm, did not look unstoppable in the clinch. A lot of her game was women would try and head and arm throw her when she had double underhooks, and she would hit an uranagi or a suplex or whatever and throw him backwards over her head. that was her clinch game. Holly Holm was punching into the clinch with double underhooks and just holding Cyborg along the fence. And you're like, Holly Holm, if you did anything offensive for the clinch, you could win this fight right here. But you're Holly Holm, so you don't, because you box. I wrote that in my article about this fight. I was like, Megan Anderson, who was then out wrestled by Holly Holm of all people. So I think that there's a chance that there's a decent sized weakness there for an area that could be exploited in Cyborg. If you don't have monstrous Amanda Nunes power. So that's the thing. We're doing Killing the Queen brackets if you don't have monstrous Amanda Nunes power. Anyway, I'm going to sign off this week. I've got I'm going to do a little preview on Rising now, which I'm going to put up for the Patreon boys. If you want to get in on the Patreon, listen to some history episodes, read lots of new articles that I do every week, do that. It allows me to do this show. Don't forget to check out the Filthy Casuals guides, which are unmonetized. I don't make anything off them. I just enjoy putting them out there. And I take them down after fight week anyway. If you want to send an email to the podcast, fightsgonbypodcast@gmail.com, and check out thefightprimer.com for everything I'm writing. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Felicia Spencer's Lady Taint Lift Bless.